Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We delighted you to welcome to the first International Conference on Language, Literature, and Culture in Jakarta, Indonesia, 30 October 2012. Her Excellency Mokrin Selma, the Honorable Professor Dr. Kusenia Kostina, and Professor Dr. Farzad Sharifian, Director of the Academic World 8027. The Conference General Chair, Associate Professor Dr. Muhammad Reza Mansori Daneshvar, the Conference Local Chair, Associate Professor Dr. Kasra Majburi Yazdi, our invited speaker, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, it is my pleasure to be an MC for the Academic World International Conference on Language, Literature, and Culture. My name is Ridhania, and I'm from Yogyakarta State University. On behalf of the organizer, the academic world, we wish to extend our warm welcome and thank you to all participants, guests of honor, delegates, and representatives for the academic world, foreign and local participants to this first Academic World International Conference on Language, Literature, and Culture. To begin the opening ceremony with the blessings, I would like to start into our recitation and a moment of silence. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, for your information, today we have about more than 50 participants and also linguistic experts and professionals joining this conference. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, to begin with, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Kusenia Kostina, the Director of the Academic World 8027, to deliver his welcome speech. Please welcome Professor Dr. Kusenia Kostina.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to greet all of you here on behalf of organizers and...
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Kusenia Kostina, for the remarkable speech. Next, I am honored to invite Professor Dr. Muhammad Reza Mansori Daneshvar to deliver an officiating speech. Please welcome Professor Dr. Muhammad Reza Mansori Daneshvar.
About 20 countries here. We met some of them last night, and we're all here for the purpose of actually not only interacting for business purposes.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Muhammad Reza Mansori Daneshvar, for a meaningful speech and officiating for the International Conference Language, Literature, and Culture. Next, we are honored to introduce our first keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Majburi Yazdi. He is currently Associate Professor in the Department of Medieval and Modern Language Faculty from Oxford University. His main research interests are in language as culture behavior, context culture, and communication. In addition, Dr. Kasra Majburi Yazdi has been a consultant for international agencies such as the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD. Without further ado, I would like to invite Associate Professor Dr. Kasra Majburi Yazdi from Oxford University to give the first keynote speech about language as culture behavior, context culture, and communication. Please welcome Associate Professor Dr. Kasra Majburi Yazdi.
Learning, people often talk about culture, but this can be understood different ways. I'd like to start with one classification outlined by a man named Hector Hammerly in 1982. He identified three areas or types of culture. The first is achievement culture, and this would include architecture, music, theater, art, literature, the things that would be considered the hallmarks of a civilization. He also identified a category known as, which he termed informational culture. These would be facts about a country that are considered to be important, such as geography, or the government system, the political system, history, population, family structure, those kinds of things. And finally, he identified the third category as behavioral culture. These would include day-to-day life, how to negotiate life within the society, things like how to make greetings. In Japan, in the case of Japan, the fact that you take off your shoes before entering someone's home, or the fact that it's acceptable to slurp noodles when you're eating, how to respond to compliments. Those kinds of things are behavioral culture. And these kinds of culture are treated different ways in different programs, but I would suggest that it's the behavioral culture that's most important in a language learning class. Achievement culture and informational culture can be gained in other means, but it's the behavioral culture where language and culture come together in the most important and most significant ways. Later on in 1996, as part of a national effort to identify standards related to language teaching and language learning, a committee identified culture in these ways, as including perspectives, which would be the meanings, attitudes, values, and ideas of a culture, practices, the patterns of social behavior, social interaction, and the products, the books and things that a culture produces. More recently, I wanted to make one point, and there's always that range between traditional and modern, and the integration of foreign elements as well. Galal Walker in 2000 identified that native speakers might see their culture in three different ways, or it could be classified into three different areas. One would be revealed culture. These would be things that a native speaker would be happy to share about his or her own culture, the things that they would want other people to know, other people to understand about his or her own culture. Ignored culture would be those things that a native might not even think about until a non-native might demonstrate that there's a different way of doing things. Suppressed culture would include those things that a native may not be proud of or may not want to share with someone from another culture. And again, in this classification, I would suggest that ignored culture is the most important in a language learning class, because these are the things that do apply to daily living and daily interactions. And since by definition they are not necessarily salient or thought about by native speakers, these are all the more important for us to deal with in a language learning class.
Thank you very much, Associate Professor Dr. Kasra Majburiyasti, for your presentation and the sharing of the keynote on language as culture, behavior, context, culture, and communication. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of the opening ceremony. I'm thankful to all guests and participants to this ceremony. We will have a coffee break about 15 minutes, and we will come back to the parallel session of conference at the dedicated room. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, now we will continue to the next session. However, before we move further to the next agenda, the technical committee would like to thank our general sponsor of ICLLC, Bank Mandiri, Sage Publications, PT Adikarya Proyek Syariah Tower, PT Telkomsel, Kampina Ice Cream, Nestle, Unilever, Nivea, Vaseline, British Council. Thank you for your attention. Next, we are honored to introduce our first keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Farzad Sharifian from Monash University. His main research interests are in culture linguistics. In addition, Dr. Farzad Sharifian has been a consultant for international agencies such as the United Nations on Trade and Development. Without further ado, I would like to invite Associate Professor Dr. Farzad Sharifian from Monash University to give the first keynote speaker about culture linguistics. Please welcome Associate Professor Dr. Farzad Sharifian.
In this keynote, today I'd like to talk a bit about the potential of cultural linguistics as a general framework, both a theoretical framework and an analytical framework for the study of pragmatic meaning. In particular, I'd like to elaborate on how cultural linguistics can be employed to examine the cultural underpinnings of certain speech acts. First, I'd like to talk a bit about pragmatics and the study of culture in relation to pragmatics. There were three traditions, at least within pragmatics, that have focused on the role of culture and the study of pragmatics. And here I'm referring to the work by Anna Trosborg in the book Pragmatics Across Languages and Cultures. Trosborg talks about three traditions: contrastive pragmatics, cross-cultural pragmatics, and intercultural pragmatics. When she talks about contrastive pragmatics, she refers to those studies of traditional studies within the paradigm of contrastive linguistics, where people focused on L1, L2 comparison and the notion of interlanguage pragmatics and negative transfer. So basically, pragmatic differences across languages were seen to be linguistic phenomenon and not so much of cultural in nature. Cross-cultural pragmatics refers to studies of pragmatic speech acts, where people looked at different speech acts in different languages. For example, request in Hebrew versus English. They looked at these speech acts and their realizations in different languages separately and then compared them with each other. I'll talk a bit about this further. The third tradition, which is called intercultural pragmatics, focuses on intercultural interaction between people from different cultural backgrounds. So they look at really pragmatic differences across languages, but the focus is on interaction between interlocutors coming from different linguistic and cultural backgrounds. This is more of a recent tradition, if you like. Cross-cultural pragmatics focused on pragmatic differences and differences in the realizations and enactment of speech acts. And they focused on how far these differences in speech acts reflected cultural values. And by cultural values, they meant values such as directness, solidarity, social harmony, sincerity, intimacy, assertiveness, cordiality, and self-expression. So the idea was that differences in the ways in which a speech act such as request is enacted in different languages would reflect, for example, the degrees to which people can directly ask for requests. Anna Wierzbicka criticizes this tradition, and she says, when one compares the ways in which different writers use these.
Very much Associate Professor Dr. Farzad Sharifian for your presentation and sharing of the keynote and language as cultural linguistics. Thank you once again for Professor Dr. Farzad Sharifian with the end of the speech from our speaker. It means that we have reached the end of our program. I would like to thank for our guest speaker today and also our participants, particularly those from all over the country. Once again, we thank all those who have come here today to join this conference. I hope it's going to be beneficial to all viewers. Thank you so much for your attention. Have a safe ride back to your house. May we meet again for another event. Thank you.